Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Gomes. I'm a Vedic astrologer. I've been a practicing Vedic astrologer for roughly 35 years now, close to 35 years now. And I am located in New Bedford, Massachusetts. You can contact me for readings or lessons by either texting or calling 508 525 0001, or you can email me at garygomesg@gmail.com. Again, that's garygomesg@gmail.com. It's all run together, no spaces between my name and the G. Okay, and I'll say the phone number again because it looks like it's not transcribing well, and that's my fault, not the system's fault. So it's 508 525 0001. Okay. So you can also look me up on Facebook, Instagram. Um, I'm on a variety of Twitter. I'm on Twitter as well. So you can find me in a variety of different places and contact me, or else contact me through my website at Northeast Institute of Vedic Astrology and Studies. Okay, so this week I want to discuss uh, just briefly the Trump inauguration, so that will give us a feeling for how the second term will manifest, the second Trump term as 47th president. And so this is a relatively rare phenomenon in presidential politics. There's only been one other president who's served a split term, and that was Grover Cleveland. And his second term was much less fruitful than his first term. Um, and again, there were allegations uh, that uh, Cleveland was cheated out of a second term. I want to say it was by Benjamin Harrison, but I think, but the circumstances of that particular election were not quite uh, the same as the last one were. There wasn't a large pandemic on. It was really it was kind of interesting. They so so let me pull up the chart. So enough of this. And I actually had a discussion about uh, Trump, and I'll discuss the outer planets just a little bit as I go into this discussion. I had a discussion with a student about Uranus being such an important influence on Trump's chart. And it is true, it is going through his sun sign right now. That is definitely true. Um, but I think also, if so, I don't have Trump's chart in front of me, but also Jupiter is going through Trump's 10th house as well. That gives a certain authority to individuals when they assume office, uh, whether or not you like Trump or dislike or hate Trump or don't care about Trump. Um, it's hard to find somebody who's really neutral about him, but that does give us certain um, provenance And it also activates Rahu in his chart. Trump has a Sun Rahu conjunction in his 10th house. And I'm trying to get the chart to share. Excuse me, it's having some problems here. Um, the inauguration chart to share. And one thing you'll notice is this chart doesn't look particularly incredible at first glance, but there are certain mitigating factors which make it a little bit better than it seems to be initially. So I'm going to give you the straight information. I'm not going to lie to you. Um, so let's go over here. See if we can pull that chart one more time. Try it again. This time it came through. Third time's the charm. It's a Jupiter number. Okay. And I would like to remind you to subscribe, share, and comment. And if you feel so inclined, like um, the this broadcast. So I'm leaving the outer planets in the chart so we can see we have this was at the official time of the inauguration, not when Trump actually signed in. I don't really um, pay much attention because it's really not going to change the rising sign all that much, and that's really what's more important. It's certainly not going to change the Charadasha sequence. It'll only marginally change the Vimshotri Dasha sequence. So I feel confident that this rising sign is sufficient for our purposes. So if you look from the chart, he has an Aries rising. Now, one of the first things I noticed was that Mars was retrograde and debilitated and at very low degree in the fourth house in this chart. So that will give him enemies. However, the interesting thing about this is a lot of the enemies won't be very strong. And if we go over here uh, to this particular page or to this particular chart, this is um, a Ashtaga page. I had to stop and think for a second. So Ashtaga page. This is actually pretty impressive. Um, the stronger the sign that the rising sign is in Sarvashtika Varga, usually the easier it is to get things done. Even the sign in which Mars is placed as the sign of position and power is very strong. The weakest house is the 10th house. Second strongest house is the 7th house, which has to do with allies and relationships. So the 10th house um, has the sun in it, which is one of the most auspicious planets for the sign. Um, so Mars is debilitated. There's no doubting that. But it's aspecting Venus and Saturn, which are two enemy planets for this rising sign. And it has this kind of perverse effect of actually turning a weakness into strength. So also there's one other thing I would draw your attention to, and that is Ketu is stationary direct. Rahu is stationary direct. So this means this will be an expensive presidency. I'm not going to lie to you about it. But Jupiter's in the second house retrograde. It will also be a prosperous presidency. Okay, so I think one of the things that you have to look at when you see Rahu in the 12th house is it's the largely disruptive period has already happened. Saturn is aspecting the first house. It will slow down some of the changes that Trump wants to make. Mars in the fourth house being weak will speed up some of the changes Trump wants to make in his presidency. Uh, but they will be contested, but the opposition will be weak. The other thing is this can indicate a decline in housing prices, okay, because Mars is weak. It can also indicate increasing prosperity. If we're looking at the sun's authority, the sun is essentially the government. This chart looks for a diminishing of government. This was one of Trump's promises. And Mercury's in the ninth house. A lot of these promises will be delivered rather quickly. They'll be delayed a little bit by Saturn aspecting the first house. But that flurry of activity you saw the first week was not accidental. Essentially, he'll have until the end of the year to get most of the changes or most of the things that he wants to get wiped out. Then there'll be more of a focus on economic growth and economic prosperity. Now, this isn't to say this presidency will be entirely positive. I'm not going to be that naive. Um, the Moon K2 conjunction indicates he'll receive a lot of criticism. He'll receive unexpected enemies. Foreign relations, he'll actually do fairly well. He'll actually open up channels of communication, and there'll be some financial gain from foreign relations. The Venus-Saturn conjunction over here in the 11th house, he'll increase friendships among women and minorities. But the problem with this particular combination with the first lord being in the fourth house is it does make him very prone to illness. And I'm not wishing that upon anybody. And there will be a tendency towards violence in this presidency, not necessarily from the government, but from homegrown groups. And so you'll see what I would call a certain amount of subterfuge or a certain amount of um, traditionalists or special interests trying to stop um, presidential progress. It's interesting because the eighth house has to do with secret service organizations or with underground reps. He'll actually have the media as a kind of an ally because Mercury's over here. However, for about the next couple of months, you'll see the media very, very hostile, or at least the traditional media very hostile towards Trump. And this is also traditional media. Um, so this will not be a smooth transition. I think one of the things that I learned in Vedic astrology is that Jupiter is really a planet of traditional um, or values or of vested interests. And I'm not saying that negatively. Jupiter's main job is to um, maintain the flow of current expectations. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, it essentially supports the status quo, whatever the status quo has become over time. So you have this, and it actually fits pretty much. There's a sequence in Vimshottari Mahadasha, which I think is significant, in that you have um, K2 is the first one, at least according to the current system. Uh, Venus is the second one, which is connected with comfort. So K2's rebirth. Venus is connected with comfort and security and stability and the joy of youth. Sun is connected with responsibility, taking on one's duties. Moon is more connected with domestic life. Mars is connected with expanding property or gaining acquisitions or making a mark on the world. Rahu is the disruptive Mahadasha. I tend to associate it very strongly with midlife crisis. And Rahu, the United States is going through a Rahu Mahadasha right now, where it's re-examining the direction it's taken over the past few years and trying to reconfigure that to see if it changes its vision of itself. And Jupiter will, after all this rebellion and revolution, a new consensus will form around Jupiter. And Jupiter is essentially a new consensus planet. Jupiter is retrograde. Trump wants to break up the new consensus. He wants to change the direction. Now, whether or not you agree with that is entirely up to you. I'm just reporting the chart. Okay. So that's what he's talking about. That's what his plan is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And he wants to change the government. So that makes perfect sense given the timing of this chart. Will he be able to do so with this weak Mars? It might be tough, but with this strong Saurashtriga Varga chart, he just might be able to do it. Okay. So this is something where you won't see the charts. This is a rare event where you won't see this chart backing up this chart. However, for this particular rising sign, the two most difficult, or the three most difficult planets are Mercury, which he has support from, and Venus and Saturn. Okay. So Saturn owns the 11th house, which is not considered to be a good house um, for movable rising signs. And Venus rules the second house of death and the seventh house of death in this chart. So again, if these planets are located in the 11th house, it could mean early death, but this Rahu in the 12th house does mean that there will be a shift in sensibilities by the end of the term. Um, and I'm not going to project out and say that this will um, give another 12 years of Republican rule, like some people are saying, but basically, a lot of the radicalism, a lot of the desire for social change is the desire for social change is wasting away. That's that Rahu in the 12th house. Okay, so um, and it doesn't mean I have anything against social change. I'm just telling you what the chart says. So I think overall, given the Mahadasha, this will be a relatively successful presidency. Now, without some challenges, there'll be a lot of court challenges. And there already are a lot of court challenges. But I think given these charts, now again, it won't be without some difficulty. Okay, so that's something that, so I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm relatively sure we'll see some domestic violence, maybe even some health issues crop up around 2020, around the end of around middle of 2025, and also around December of 2026. But by that time, there will be shifts in foreign relations. Does this mean more depth for the United States? Well, it's in the United States' fourth house. So essentially not really. There'll be a shift and there'll be a reorientation of domestic policy. So if I take this as being the United States rising sign and this as being a seventh house, the moon is over here in the United States chart. And the United States is in the middle of a transition called a 7.5 year period of Saturn. So I'll just show you the US chart for just 1 second. And then we'll go to the chart for today. All right, so the United States is a Sagittarius rising sign. It's the United States is in a constant, what I would call a constant state of change because of that. It's in a constant state of deconstruction and reconstruction. And that's mainly because of this particular nakshatra that the rising sign is in, Mula nakshatra. That's a very difficult nakshatra. We have a lot of social upheavals, a lot of domestic upheavals. But Mercury being in this particular sign actually shows is focused on its image, is focused on how successful it can be. Here's the moon sign. So the moon is in Aquarius, K2's in Capricorn. There's a lot of focus on wealth, and also there's a lot of focus on allies and allegiances in this chart. Mars is passing over Mercury right now, Mercury Rahu. We've just seen um, what I would call a major cleansing of uh, media over the past couple of weeks. So that's why you're seeing all these massive layoffs in CNN and MSNBC and NBC. And it's mainly because Mars is just cleaning this particular um, chart out. This reminds me a great deal of the first phase of Nixon's presidency, uh, when the media was essentially beaten into submission by people like Spiro Agnew. For those of you who don't remember that, just do me a favor and look up Spiro Agnew and also Nixon's ascent uh, in 1968 to 1969. I thought it was fascinating because he essentially sent um, Agnew was not a J.D. Vance type of president, although vice president, although he served pretty much the same function in that he spoke for uh, the working class, and he was very critical of how the press was covering events. Now, Agnew later got thrown out on, or he got dismissed from the vice presidency, or resigned the vice presidency because of corruption charges. So that doesn't mean that Vance will go through the same experience. It just means essentially they're tools to essentially deconstruct the media. And so far in, um, you'll see a wipeout of media, and then maybe uh, a um, a resurfacing of new forms of media towards the end of the year. But I think that this has been interesting because this this was coming actually before Trump. So essentially the mainstream channels were losing audience to the cable channels, and the cable channels were losing audience um, to the streaming channels. Now, however you feel about that, um, that seems to be we're heading towards, at least temporarily, a more decentralized way of getting our information. And the reason I say temporarily is because in, I think in the 1930s, I'm sorry, in the 2030s, we'll see kind of a return to a more centralized uh, communication system, more standardized. But at least over the next 7 or 8 years or so, it'll be kind of an exciting time in media and kind of an interesting time in media. So, and again, you have to be careful what you pay attention to. You have to be double check and make sure they're getting it right. But I think that that's kind of where we're headed. The United States does engage a lot in relations with other countries. We've always, ever since, even though we were isolationist in World War One or prior to World War One, we always had foreign interests and foreign possessions um, and expansionary conquests were always part of our basic nature. So that's so so the cluster of all these planets in the seventh houses, it has to do with other people's lands. So I think that's why one of the desires for Trump is to head into space, head into Greenland if he can do it. Uh, you know, those those kinds of ideals. So it's a reassertion of a tradition which you may not be too happy about in the United States, but has always been part of our nature. All right, so let's go to the now chart and we'll see what's going on right now. All right, so as I'm speaking, we have Jupiter in the first house. So know I'm telling you the truth. That's um, I pride myself on being a truthful person. Um, so again, it'll be an expensive presidency, just in terms of the Trump presidency. It'll upset a lot of people, uh, but it will be an effective presidency. Um, so right now we have Jupiter in the first house, Mars is in the second house, so there's still a lot of conflict around. But overall, there is a feeling, just in general, that we're heading in the right direction. It's a slight majority feeling, not really overwhelming, but it's a slight majority feeling. And Mars is aspecting K2. So our luck is kind of strong right now because Mercury disposes to the 10th house. I'm sorry, to the ninth house. And Venus and Saturn are in the 10th house in a friendly sign. And Rahu's in the 11th. So there will be gains over the next week. I'm deliberately leaving Uranus out of the equation just because I really find if I have Rahu, I can pretty much um, cover Uranus. Um, and so just overall, Jupiter, Mars, good for land, good for property, good for expansion. Uh, some difficulty understanding kids, some miscommunication with kids. Moon is in the eighth house, some small pessimism. The moon is waning, is heading towards the sun. It's really a weak moon. And the sun, Mercury, moon conjunction, which will occur on Tuesday, will give a new moon to us. I'm not particularly worried about the seven planets, about the planetary lineup. Um, it's rare. Um, I don't think the only planet that really affects us gravitationally is the moon. You know, and the planets, you know, this may be heresy to some of my fellow astrologers, but the planet's gravitational pull doesn't work that way. Um, the moon is really the only planet that has a gravitational impact on us. Um, the other ones are too insignificant. Um, and so if this moon is in Sagittarius, that's eighth house, Lord going to the first house. So there will be attempts to undercut the direction of the United States, especially by media. But I think just overall, from this chart, you have a relatively, and Mars is aspecting Mercury again. So that's why you've seen a lot of the press come out, like really more aggressively than they have over the past couple of weeks in terms of Trump's nominees. But in terms of like world events, what I would look at is I would look for problems in very traditional countries. You'll see a lot of shifts in very traditional countries over the next few weeks. And also over the next couple of months, I would say it'll peak around April. A lot of people falling out of power or coming dangerously close to falling out of power. Um, so we're seeing this in, like I said many times before, in Germany, France. And in terms of the economy, Rahu is in the 11th house. I don't trust Rahu. He gives temporary enthusiasm, but Jupiter's in the first, so that actually gives us some financial security. And Venus is with Saturn in um, the 10th house. So, and Venus is outside of uh, planetary war. That's when Saturn's like 1 degree before Venus. So Venus is starting to show some more energy, and it's heading towards its exaltation sign. Will be there within a couple of days. So that will actually raise uh, economic pressure. But again, I'm cautioning people to be a little bit conservative about Bitcoin, especially over the next 6 months. Things like Bitcoin or AI over the next 6 months, because um, that Venus Rahu conjunction can raise unrealistic expectations. And I I would I would stay out of those. I would recommend people invest cautiously. This is not investment advice, but I would recommend people really check out their odds because, like I said, the Venus Rahu conjunction can give unrealistic expectations. Um, but it's not entirely horrible. Um, and so there can be some temporary wealth, but again, around April 15th, I think you'll see certain market factors start to crash a little bit. So it's caution is advised. Let's see now. So let's go back to the chart for individuals. So let's go to the individual signs. Um, in terms of war, I think you're going to see resolution of war within about, I'd say about 3 to 4 months of the outside. Israel may take longer. Um, Ukraine, I don't think so much. Well, let's see now. All right, so let's go to Aries. So this is the part that most people wait for, I'm pretty sure. Um, so for Aries, good for financial expansion, Good for more bravery, less concerned about house dynamics and more concerned about what you want out of life. Moon is aspecting some help from women. Uh, K2's is in the sixth house. You'll have to watch out for health issues. A lot of flus, a lot of bugs going around right now. Uh, Sun and Mercury are in the 10th house of the chart, so that should give some financial gains, especially from past efforts. And Venus, Saturn, slow but steady gains. Rahu's in the 12th house. Again, most of us have to watch out for over expenditure. Most of us are worried about money, but at least from this combination, Rahu moving towards the 11th house will diminish that worry just a little bit. For Taurus, Taurus has Jupiter in the first house is bringing the energy of the 11th and the 8th house, so that could mean unexpected gains in through financial processes or through relationship partners, but also unexpected blocks from relationship partners. Mars is in the second house, some potential gains through real estate. Um, K2, the Renata Lagna is something I don't often talk about, but this is essentially one of the um, missions of the chart. And this chart's mission is to focus on home life and on themselves. So for Taurus, Jupiter aspects the seventh house, good for relationship life. But again, slow movement is recommended because Saturn's aspecting the seventh house in this chart, and Sun and Mercury in the ninth house. Some problems or issues with the government, but overall some good luck with the government. Moon in the second house, that's the third house, Lord. I'm sorry, Moon's in the eighth house, that's the third house, Lord in the eighth house. That's considered fairly good because people will be able to control their impulses or their buying instincts. For Gemini, Mars is retrograde in the first house. A lot of Geminis this will be May 15th to June 15th, or people who have Gemini moons or Gemini rising signs. A lot of these folks will be very concerned about fights or legal engagements. They may be involved in lawsuits, uh, maybe falling. This won't necessarily hurt them. As a matter of fact, they'll have enough strength to fight back. And, and essentially, Moon being in the seventh house will give them strength through partners and strength uh, through friends. Um, K2's in the fourth house, some concerns about family matters, but it does show things slowly improving with children. So children have been under some kind of burden. They're coming out of that burden right now. But the confidence of the sign is relatively low because the Lord of the first house is in the eighth house. And there are people who are, I won't say lying, that's um, too much of a damning insult, but who are misrepresenting themselves to these individuals. So there are some sneaky people running around, especially in the government, trying to trap them, but that'll pass within about 2 to 3 weeks. Um, Venus is in the ninth house along with Saturn. That's generally a good placement for this rising sign. Um, and Rahu's in the 10th house, so there is some anxiety about career matters and some anxiety about expenditures. But overall, this will not be a bad week for um, for um, for this sign. And let me just go to Cancer. Um, Cancer has Mars in the 12th house, so this can give some alienation from relationship partners or people being used by relationship partners. Um, Relationship partners will be demanding or seem a little distant or difficult to deal with. And they'll also seem a little bit depressed or detached, at least from this chart. Um, K2 is in the third house in this chart. So this sign will have to show a lot of courage over the next few weeks. Um, but and, but these are only short-term issues. Uh, in a couple of days, Moon will move out of this particular uh, difficult placement and into the seventh house, where we'll gain partners and we'll gain allies. For K2, K2's in the third house for Cancer, so a lot of courage for the sign. Um, let's see now. Saturn is in the eighth house. So again, there's a lot of restructuring going on in this individual's life. In these individuals' lives, they're having to stand on their own. They're having to face life without a lot of emotional support, to be quite honest. And but they'll succeed. And especially when Venus enters Rahu, they'll triumph. Jupiter's in the 11th house, is in the 11th house, so there should be financial gains or gains of friends. Mars in the 12th house, we've already discussed. For Leo, Leo has Sun in the 6th house. This is a good placement for Leo because it makes the sign more aggressive, more willing to fight. Venus and Saturn are in the 7th house, makes the sign a little bit detached from relationships, but relatively happy with them. So there's not this, but it can open up the possibility of affairs. So just be careful about that. Um, K2 is in the 2nd house. This particular sign is, trying to think of a good way to put it. K2 in Virgo is a good placement, but it can lead to misunderstanding speech. It can lead to um, difficulty in communication. But it's also very clever. It's also very discriminatory. So it'll be tough to fool this particular sign. Moon is in the 5th house. The moon is lord of the 12th house in the 5th house. So it could indicate gains from foreign countries, but also expenses because of children. Sun and Mercury are in the 6th house. 6th house lord, we've already spoken about this. Good communication skills. So contradicting that K2, but also, like I said, it's there's a tendency to blur things out without really thinking about them. You can recover from that though. We've already spoken about the Venus and Saturn conjunction for Leo. Rahu's in the 8th house. This sign can expect deceit from behind the scenes. So people trying to knock it down uh, by undercutting it or by having secret or hidden agendas. That's um, particularly true in, and I hesitate to mention this in previous weeks, but that's essentially this is Trump's rising sign, and almost anybody who has a Leo rising sign or strong planets in Leo will experience some level of deceit or um, underhandedness from other people. Mars is in the 11th house, so gains from property. For Virgo, Virgo has K2 in the first house. Again, extremely good for intuition, not good for relationships. Moon is in the 4th house. If Moon is in the 4th house for this particular rising sign, it will give financial gains. Sun and Mercury are in the 5th house. Again, expenses due to children or due to one's own um, entertainment habits. Venus and Saturn are in the 6th house. This is essentially a good combination for success through work, but it will throw a few obstacles in your way as you're trying to achieve success. Rahu is in the seventh house. We've already spoken about that. Not a good time for relationships. Wait until at least June. Jupiter's in the ninth house. That's a good combination for financial success and financial growth. Mars is in the 10th house, good for work life. For Libra, Libra has Ketu in the 12th house, good for spiritual advancement, not quite so good for money, if I'm honest with you. Um, the one good thing about this particular placement for Libra is that its desires are shifting, it's ready to make some changes and ready to move forward in its life. Venus and Saturn are in the fifth house, so that indicates a lot of work to get to teach or communicate, but basically worth it. And the person will essentially like this effort, um, and it'll be worthwhile. It may not be worthwhile immediately, but it'll be worthwhile. Um, Work will tend to be very good when Venus is in the sixth house along with Rahu. So there'll be a lot of fame, a lot of recognition, but also some enemies, if I'm not quite honest, with that Venus-Rahu conjunction. Um, Jupiter's in the eighth house. That's good for researching occult or metaphysical subjects or doing research just in general. Mars is in the ninth. That's actually good for career life and good for money. So you should see an improvement in finances over the next month or so. That's been blocked for this rising sign over the past month, mainly because of Mars being weak in Cancer. For Scorpio, Scorpio's got its Lord Mars in the eighth house, and that indicates perhaps some unseen uh, financial growth. Moon is in the second house, but again, this tends to make this sign kind of disappear into the background. Jupiter does aspect the first house, though, so that's actually good for financial growth. Um, Moon is in the second house, good for financial growth, but it's waning. It'll probably come to a standstill over the next week or so, if I'm quite honest. And then it'll start to resume a little bit next week. Sun and Mercury are in the third house, so it's good for courage, good for gain. Venus and Saturn, there's a little bit of a feeling of loss of power, loss of control with those combinations in that sign. Rahu's in the fifth house. Again, some problems with children. Children are difficult. Um, Mars in the eighth house, some victimization from spouse. Ketu's in the 11th house. Again, really not a lot of trust in friendships. So I'd advise Scorpio to focus on financial gains and also um, trying to stay out of the public limelight as much as possible over the next week or so, week, maybe 2 weeks, um, just so it won't become um, prone to attack. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's out to get Scorpio. That's not the idea. But I think with this particular combination, it can drain Scorpio's energy and it can make it vulnerable to illnesses. Sagittarius has Moon in the first house. The Lord of the first is in the sixth house. So again, some problems with illnesses, some problems with change, enemies. Sun and Mercury are over in the second house. That's a good combination for both luck and career. Uh, Rahu's in Venus and Saturn are in the third. That's good for determination to make yourself happy. Rahu's in the fourth. Uh, I think overall, this can indicate a feeling of uncertainty about the future, and K2 in the 10th underscores that. But I think Mars in the seventh There'll be a feeling of more direction and also the feeling that uh, this sign will gradually overcome its limitations. For Capricorn, Sun and Mercury are in the first house. That's the eighth lord and the ninth lord and the sixth lord. So there are more malefic influences in this house than benefic influences by house rulership. But overall, it does give a certain amount of confidence to Capricorn. Sun in the first house for Capricorn does put it in a difficult sign, but it's got some confidence. It can make money off long-term investments, unexpected investments. Venus and Saturn are in the second house. That actually increases its financial um, intuition. Rahu's in the third house, so there's a lot of ambition in the sign. Jupiter's in the fifth, which essentially gives good luck from speculation. Mars is in the sixth, though you'll have to watch out for land and I would say raw assets like oil and minerals. Those aren't good things to fool around with. Also, some danger of mechanical breakdowns, if I'm honest. For K2 in the ninth house, um, that's actually a good placement for unexpected financial luck. Okay, Aquarius. Aquarius has Venus and Saturn in the first house. That's a very powerful Raj Yoga for Aquarius. So Raj Yogas are especially lucky combinations in the Vedic chart. And Mars doesn't aspect that sign, but Mars is in the fifth house, which can give some gains or some improvements to real estate. Jupiter's in the fourth, so it can improve learning opportunities. Rahu's in the second, though, so it doesn't feel like it has enough money. That's going to be a perpetual problem with this particular sign. Ketu's in the eighth house. That can give unexpected expenses. And Sun and Mercury are in the 12th house. Financial losses due to children and also spouse. For, and also business partners. For Pisces, finally, last but not least, we have Rahu in the first house. I told you many months ago this gives institutional change. It'll give sudden, unexpected institutional change around April and maybe even panic, but right now it's okay. Um, the second house is ruled by Mars. By the way, that's I would say April. April is a likely attempt um, on the current president's life again around that time span. But again, I don't think it'll be successful, but it'll cause some panic. Um, one, two, three, four, fourth house. Mars is in the fourth house. Some domestic problems. Relationship partners will seem to be uncaring. And this sign will be a little bit timid to make any changes. You'll want to keep things relatively placid. Moon is in the 10th house in this chart. So it could indicate change of job duties or change of careers, but also gain and financial success, and also maybe even movement to a new position. So this is not necessarily a bad chart for Pisces rising, but do expect some losses and some changes at work. So that's it for the signs. Let's go over it and see where the astro mapping chart leads us. And we'll try to expand it and close it down. And all right, so this looks better. All right, so let me get my mug out of the mix here and put it down where there are very few land masses. Okay, And I'll move this sign a little bit over. I'll move this over a little bit. So we can see the planetary lines. I do my best main voice now. All right, let's see now. All right, so there's a Mercury line running through Hawaii, Mars line running through Hawaii. Still a lot of issues with land disputes in Hawaii, and that's going to continue on for quite some time, I think. Um, there'll be land disputes and even mineral disputes over in Western Canada. Uh, we can see this Saturn and Venus line running through California all the way up into um, Washington State, Oregon, and into Nevada. So we still have the danger of fires. Um, and we have a Rahu line running right next to California. So there's still the danger of fires. I'm hoping those stop really soon. Um, and I think with Mercury and Gemini, they will. Um, but it'll take about another week, I think, for that to calm down. Moon is in, so this is panic in this part of the country. Scandal connected with government in both Arizona and California. And we have a Rahu line coming up, kind of affecting all the way up to Montana. And let's see now. This is a moon line indicating a potential change in government in really around Utah and um, Montana. We have maybe Colorado. We have no lines, but we have a Mars. Mars and Moon are encapsulating Texas and Mexico and Guatemala. So we can expect increased violence, I would say in Michigan, all the way down through Louisiana. Maybe a lot of news stories coming out of there. There's a Mercury line coming through Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, all the way through Mississippi, Alabama. I I think we'll see a lot of news stories coming out of here and also out of Central America, especially Guatemala and down into Nicaragua and down into Panama. I have a sun line coming through close to Washington, D.C., and also intersecting Cuba and also intersecting Venezuela and Peru and parts of Chile. Now, sun lines are not necessarily bad lines, but that's where the attention in the chart tends to fall. And so you will see some resistance to change because sun's in Capricorn in this chart. And this will show up especially around New York and New York State, and also in Cuba, and also down into South America, down to the nations I mentioned in South America. There's a Jupiter line running through Brazil. Brazil will be um, definitely trying to maintain the status quo, um, but it won't really succeed because we have a Saturn line. It'll seem oppressive. It'll seem difficult. And you have a Venus line coming close to the Azores, maybe some potential flooding out there. And there's a Rahu line. I hope no earthquakes out there, but possibility. And down to the Cape Verde Islands as well. Um, We have Ireland has a sun line going through it. So does Spain. So does um, Libya, Algeria, down into, I believe that's Niger. Um, and I think this part of the world will see more oppressive administrations. So this is affecting England, France, um, most of Africa, and there'll be a lot of news off the west coast of Africa and down to South Africa, uh, and it'll mostly be connected with government scandals and um, protests against the government. Jupiter line is running through close to Ukraine, running through Saudi Arabia, running through uh, down into Madagascar. And I think this region of the world, especially with the Saturn line passing over it, is definitely volatile, especially right here. And this goes into Iran and it goes into Saudi Arabia and Yemen, I believe that is down there. So, I, so again, this part of the world is still very volatile, very difficult. Venus is in Iran. You will see, I would say, some protests for modernization, or maybe even some willingness to be amicable uh, from this part of the world. There's a Venus Rahu conjunction coming up in Afghanistan and Pakistan. That part of the world is this part of the world is very dangerous right now. So even though these three countries are not really, um, I'm just trying to think of the best word I can use to express it. They're not on the radar of a lot of people. Iran is because of its aid um, to Hamas and other organizations, or and I'm sorry, to Hezbollah and other organizations. Um, Pakistan and Afghanistan really aren't, but they're going through extraordinarily difficult economic times, and that usually spills into conflict. Don't forget, Pakistan is a nuclear nation. So it's definitely a threat. Um, and this Rahu line crossing over into India indicates India will feel somewhat threatened by them, and so will China. There's a Mars line and a Rahu line essentially surrounding India. So this doesn't mean the entire country is panicking, obviously, but there are threats on both sides of it. Um, and Myanmar is in very rough shape, as we said last week, and you'll hear a lot more news broadcasts about Myanmar and more conflicts between Vietnam and China. That seems to have been occurring, and possibly Indonesia. So um, this was one of the things that I remember from when I was in high school. Sir Ronald Toynbee had written an article in Life magazine about the historical animosity between Vietnam and China. And that was one of the things that made me convinced that the United States would be better off getting the hell out of Vietnam, uh, and because Vietnam would be the best buffer against China. But basically, Vietnam has been a bit frustrated at Chinese attempts to take uh, islands around this part of the world. And that's a news story you don't see very much, but it's a significant news story. So this part of the world looks like a little bit of a powder keg. So does this part of the world. Okay. More so than this part of the world, to be honest. Okay. So, and again, this was the eclipse last May. This was the area that was affected mostly by the eclipse last May. Um, well, I'm sorry, last October. My apologies. Last October. Um, the there's a Jupiter line running over Japan, so Japan should be able to recover pretty quickly. And Guinea and Australia don't look like they're in any danger, although Australia does look like it's inflationary territory to me. New Zealand, um, let me just see now. I try that New Zealand line. New Zealand's a bit inflationary as well. So these countries are not immune to inflation. Japan, Australia, Guinea, um, and New Zealand. I think this is sort of um, the nature of the beast. Also, there's inflationary pressure in Western Canada. If we're looking at that carefully. So those are parts of the world. And I'd also encourage you to keep your eye on this part of Africa and on this part of Europe. But these are the areas that I'm mostly concerned about. Small wars breaking out because of historical animosity, which we don't cover because they're not regimes we're interested in changing. So that's about it for this week. Again, every problem represents an opportunity. Don't be afraid to take chances because you're afraid you'll make a mistake. Life is built on making mistakes, and you have to take chances in order to grow. If you don't do anything, I heard a great quote um, the other day, and it was essentially success. You can only elude success by giving up. Okay, so I think those are words to live by. And on that note, I'll leave you to your devices. I love you all. I thank you so much for watching this, if you made it this far. And again, if there's anything you'd like me to cover, I do promise I will cover the P. Diddy trial or the P. Diddy criminal offenses. I find that particular case kind of interesting, but we have more urgent. And while I may be irrationally optimistic about the second Trump administration. I can grant you that, but I'm normally very cautious about things like that. And I wasn't optimistic about the first administration at all. Uh, so I think I think this is a change. Yes, there are some considerable headwinds, and he will face resistance. You know, that's a given. I'm not necessarily pro-Trump or anti-Trump. I'm just reporting the astrology. Given the fact the United States is in a Rahu Mahadasha, this seems like the appropriate course of action for the United States right now. Um, that will change in a few years. Okay, so that's about it for me. You probably had enough of me for now, and it doesn't mean that you can't. It doesn't mean that you can't fight against changes you don't like. Okay, that's not what that's never an intent uh, of coming out with these broadcasts. It's just I'm giving you the chart as honestly and as accurately as I can. There are definitely weaknesses in that chart, and I pointed them out right away. Okay, so that's it for this week. Bye, everyone. Thank you. I love you all. Take care of yourselves. Be good to yourselves, and go forth and prosper. Bye.